Thank you very much for joining this week's talk as we approach the 9th of Av, which actually is on Shabbos this year. And it means that we do not observe the customs of mourning that are normally associated with the 9th of Av. Those are deferred on to Sunday, the 10th of Av. And I think that this gives us a unique opportunity to get certain perspectives that we will not have when Tisha B'Av falls on any other day of the week. On the 9th of Av actually falls on any other day of the week, even though it is limited in the days that it can fall out. And we find that the first day of Pesach is always the same as Tisha B'Av, that they correspond. And so this is the themes of redemption that are symbolized in the festival of Pesach are also alluded to even though we are commemorating destruction and tragedy and loss in Tisha B'Av, we are looking forward to the cycle of Geula, of redemption, with this link in the fact that the day of the week, or the first day of the week, the first day of Pesach, is always going to fall out on the same day as Tisha B'Av. But before we get to that, another calendar connection I think is important to bear in mind, that when we become very focused on the 3 weeks, the end of Tammuz, the month of Tammuz, and then going into the month of Av, and we have this concept that when Av, the month of Av, comes in, we reduce simcha, we reduce any expression of joy. This is a time of escalating tragedy and mourning, and so we tend to be very focused on that. But I think it's important to see the 3 months of Av, Elul, and Tishri as part of a series, really, and what we go through in the month of Av, and the focuses and the soul searching that goes on in the month of Av, I think are preparation for the months of Elul and Tishri. Elul being the month of preparation for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that we have in Tishri, but I think it actually begins in the month of Av. And the focus when we are commemorating the destruction, especially of the second temple that happened on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th day of Av, and that is very clearly stated to have occurred as a result of the baseless hatred, the hatred for no reason, sinas chinam, that prevailed at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple 2,000 years ago. And so we are really focusing on improving our interpersonal relationships, on making sure that our thoughts, our words, our actions vis-a-vis other people around us, that we really make sure that these relationships are being polished and refined and being the best that they can possibly be. And I think that this is actually part of that whole calendar cycle, as well as being the very specific focus of destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and destruction of so many communities and so many tragedies that happened at this time. But it's also just this way of showing us, before we get to the months of Elul and Tishri, where our priorities have to be and the kind of work that we need to do on ourselves to really be able to celebrate and commemorate these times in our calendar in the appropriate way. So that was the broader picture that we get from this overview of the calendar. First, the connection between redemption, even on the day that seems so very far from redemption, with the fact that the link between Pesach and Tisha B'Av, and also that concept of the calendar again in this series of Av, Elul, and Tishri. But as we've often pointed out, that every year is going to give us a different perspective, a different opportunity. And this year is very much the case with the fact that we have the 9th of Av falling on Shabbos itself. And this suspension of the laws of mourning, which cannot coexist with Shabbos, that Shabbos takes precedence, Shabbos transcends. Shabbos is a day of joy and connection with Hashem. And that is something that is going to supersede the destruction, even if it is national, global, over a period of thousands of years. That weekly cycle of Shabbos, that weekly dedication and acknowledgement of the Creator, of the earth and the universe and everything in it, initially and ongoing. That is something that can give us tremendous encouragement that whatever is happening, however bleak and black it seems, that we have this hope, we have this belief in the oneness and the goodness, and even though we can't understand why certain things happen, of a plan, of a scheme, just like there is an order and a scheme of creation, there is an order and a scheme in the events that happen. And that knowledge, that feeling of connection to Hashem is something that can sustain us and has sustained us and will sustain us throughout everything that ever happens in our lives. And this is a very, very important message from this year's Tisha B'Av being on Shabbos. Another aspect that is going to happen is that we're going to read the Seder of Devarim and the Haftarah of Shabbos chazon, it's called, after the Haftarah, which comes from the prophet Isaiah. And this means vision, and this is part of the vision. It was the prophetic vision of destruction if the Jewish people were not going to learn from the lessons, from the exhortations of what they have to do, how they have to improve their behavior and stop worshipping idols and start acting with justice and looking after anybody, the people who were poor or the people who needed support and help. This was a priority, and if they weren't going to do this, if they weren't going to act honestly, then Hashem doesn't want your sacrifices, Hashem doesn't want your temple, and failure to really act on that was going to lead to the destruction. And so this is famously called Shabbos chazon, after the Haftarah. But this idea of chazon, of vision, is something that as we read it on the 9th of Av itself, we are invited, this is our opportunity, each and every one of us, to have our vision of what a rebuilt Beis Hamikdash is going to look like, is going to mean, and make it personal. Instead of, if we are blessed to live in times where we're not being persecuted and we could possibly be comfortable with where we are, and whether it's where in the world we are or where we are in our development, in our spiritual development, in our interpersonal relationships, in that development. And this is our time, the call out to us that we have to work on this concrete vision, a visualization of what it would mean to have the Beis Hamikdash rebuilt, how that is going to make the world a better place, that is going to have a light, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, that the light of Torah will come out from Zion, udvar Hashem Yerushalayim, and the word of Hashem from Yerushalayim. How do I see it? How am I going to make it happen? And I think that this is a special gift that we have this year, as Shabbos and Tisha B'Av are on the same day, very unusually. And I think that in addition to that, there are two parts in the Seder of Devarim that I just want to focus on as part of the message of how we can have concrete tools to make the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash a reality, to make it not just something that we'll have Tisha B'Av and then we'll have another year and then we'll have another Tisha B'Av and we'll go through the motions, because it is easy, even though they are not easy halachas, but we can go through motions and miss the point. And of course that applies to all of our religious service. It's about getting deep inside the meaning of the various laws and the things that we do on the outside, and make sure that they are not superficial, that they are meaningful in the deeper sense of the word. And the two of the messages that I want to pick out from the Seder of Devarim that we read on Shabbos are, firstly, the mention of the spies, the events of the spies that we read about in the Seder of Shelach, in the book of Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers. And this was when 12 princes of the tribes were sent on what was supposed to be a touring mission to the land of Israel, and they redrafted that mission, and they were spies, and not necessarily to see the good things of the land that they were supposed to see, and instead they were supposed to report back on. And this was, first of all, an event that the return of these 12, 10 of whom brought back a negative report, and the night of that negative report and the people's response to that report was Tisha B'Av. This is stated very clearly. And this is something that, again, we want to try to remedy, we want to try to rectify, and the appreciation of the land of Israel, the centrality of the land of Israel in our lives as Torah observant Jews, as in the entire book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy. This is Moshe Rabbeinu's final address to the people as he is standing on the east side of the Jordan, and he is looking over at the land, this promised land that he is not going to go into. And we are blessed, and we are, in our times, we have a Jewish sovereign state in the land of Israel, and we have to appreciate its importance to us as individuals, to us as the Jewish nation, and to the world, and the incredible contribution that the potential that we have when we are able to live in such times. But it is still a journey to a promised land, because until we have the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, our mission is not complete. And of course, once we have the Beis Hamikdash, b'mheira v'imenu, our mission will still not be complete. It will be ongoing, to be a constant source of light to all of the world, to all of the nations, and to ourselves. And so this is something, the very fact that Moshe Rabbeinu mentions it so early on in his final address, which spans a period of 5 weeks, and this is something that we are reminded of as we read the Seder of Devarim. The second aspect that I want to point out is the mention in verse 5 of chapter 1 of Devarim, when this is the sort of the very beginning of the speech, and the word that's used, Be'ever HaYarden, on the other side of the Jordan, Be'eretz Moab, in the land of Moab, Ho'il Moshe Be'er Es HaTorah Hazos Lema. Moshe began to clarify this Torah saying. And Rashi comments on this word Be'er, clarifying, B'shivin Loshon Persha Lohem. He explained it to them in 70 languages. Now, this idea of clarifying cannot be taken at face value, because all along Moshe Rabbeinu has been expounding and clarifying. And there's a very beautiful medrash that uh, at this point Moshe Rabbeinu says, any person who doesn't understand something has to come to me and I will explain it to them. And we imagine Moshe Rabbeinu, and we call him Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, as the most dedicated teacher. And throughout my education, I can think of a number of such teachers, and they were the teachers who always made themselves available, who really showed that they valued each individual student, and their life mission was to make sure that everybody understood whatever they were teaching. And of course, Moshe, our teacher, this is how he is immortalized, and he is par excellence the example of such a person. And this individual this individual connection with our greatest teacher, with our greatest leader. And this is how he is beginning this final address, which is going to span recapping, adding new laws, giving different perspectives of certain events that happened earlier on in the Torah. But still, it is this connection with each individual. It's also, in terms of the 70 languages, it's an indication of the universality of the Torah, of the wisdom of the Torah, of the original wisdom of the Torah. And this is something that when we internalize and we are convinced of it and committed to it ourselves, and we radiate that outwards. And this is something that was such a transition as far as Moshe is concerned at this point in his life, when so many challenging things had happened in quick succession. He had to go through so many arguments with the beloved Bnei Israel in the desert. He sees his brother and sister predecease him, and he knows that his sons are not going to take over his leadership. And he could have just disappeared into a pit of terrible bleakness. And what he does is he becomes our eternal, immortal teacher. And I think not only does he become our teacher, but very interesting, Rav Sachs Zatzal points out that this concept of teaching, this which we have in Hebrew with the word lamad, the root lamed mem daled. Lilmod is to learn, that's in the kal, in the simple tense. Lelamed is to teach, same root, but in a different binyan, a different grammatical tense of PL. But this word does not appear in any of the first 4 books of the Torah, Bereshit, Shemos, Vayikra, and Bamidbar. It appears 17 times in Devarim. And so, apart from being our teacher, Moshe Rabbeinu is also making us a nation of educators. So I think that this message that we can get as we observe Tisha B'Av on Shabbos is that as we learn ourselves, when we have our personal learning, which is such an important part of our lives, and we need to also spread that outwards in whatever capacity, in whatever situation we can. And this is so vital in being steps towards coming closer to the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash, because when we do that, we are making it so much more likely that it's going to happen. And we have at a time in his life where things were bleak for him, and Moshe Rabbeinu does that, and he is our role model, and he is a really a beacon of light for all of us to follow in his footsteps in our own individual ways, but to just take that message, to see how he became the teacher, and he gave us this mission that we should also become learners and teachers ourselves. And so I think that when we're looking at the centrality of the land of Israel, appreciating that, working to make that the appropriate place for the coming of Mashiach, that we ourselves are learners and teachers, taking that example from Moshe Rabbeinu. These are two concrete ways that we can find in the Sedra of Devarim that we read this week that will pick us up and elevate this Tisha B'Av experience, which is a very atypical Tisha B'Av experience. And although with many leniencies, we don't airbrush the tragedies, we don't airbrush the halachas of the morning which we observe on Sunday, but it's not the same as when it actually happens on the 9th of Av. But I think that we need to get that lift of Shabbos, that lift of the messages in the Sedra, the Haftorah of Chazon, the particular, any focus in the Sedra, but the two that I've just mentioned of the centrality of the land of Israel and becoming learners and teachers. In this way, we are going to make it possible that this is going to be, hopefully before then, so it won't even, the Tisha B'Av of this year will be a celebration and not a fast. But we should just make sure that we don't have another year that we go through motions and then we go back to what we were. So all of these things can give us exceptional encouragement and direction and as to how we can achieve it. And please God, we should achieve it. Bimheira v'yomeinu, that this coming Tisha B'Av that is going to happen this Shabbos is actually going to be a Shabbos day, but also a day of great rejoicing as we witness the coming of Moshiach and the rebuilding of our holy temple. Wishing everybody a very, very good Shabbos.